qualified to comment, particularly in relation to Marilyn's presentation and more broadly. Khurshid, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm very happy to come and share my experience and some of my research findings that I did with Institute of Development Studies at University of Sussex. And I think, some of the insights from my study and some of my personal thoughts would be very helpful and contributory to what Marilyn and Jessica have presented. What I'm going to do is to talk about three things. I first want to give you some general overview of the political economy of climate change in Bangladesh. Second, I want to talk some of the key findings, 3 or 4, from my study that I did with IDS. And finally, what would be the way forward? Not specifically based on our study, but also my personal opinion to support what Marilyn and Jessica has said. First, with the general political economy. There has been a huge shift in the discourse of climate change in Bangladesh from skeptical view that another development issue, another aid money coming in, to a genuine thinking and believing within the political circle in Bangladesh, especially after 2 rounds of big disaster we had in 2007. And post-2007 disasters has intensified the effort to develop effective institutions and policy and governance to tackle climate change problem in Bangladesh. At the same time, there has been a big emergence of new actors. While we have, the traditional old climate change actors in Bangladesh, so NGOs are there, the governments are there, private sectors are emerging. So there are lots of, people who have interest on climate change. Third dimension is the politics. There is no effective domestic politics on climate change in Bangladesh. If you look at the election manifesto that we had in 2009, there was only one political party who has included climate change in their election manifesto. And the lots of discussion we're having in climate change in Bangladesh, which is taking place within the expert and the development circle of Bangladesh based in the capital city. If you go outside, no, it is not that much. Third dimension is the huge expectation that has increased, I think, after Cancun, that Bangladesh will receive a lot of funding. At the same time, there is also frustration that Marilyn has said, because we have been doing the NAPA, we've been doing lots of planning exercises. No money is flowing. So we have 2 contradictory school of thoughts. Yes, money would come. There is also frustration within the policy circle of Bangladesh. And the final point is about the contested ideology. And that is a particular thing, is very important to understand the political economy of any subject. So we have climate justice, heavily influenced by the global climate justice movement, and we have several climate campaign group exist in Bangladesh, internationally connected. The second ideological part is the market, heavily influential. There are people within the government, donor community, and we have World Bank and other international financial institutions who are promoting that loan is an important part of managing the climate change impacted Bangladesh. So the market is also, the market-driven ideology has also huge influence over the policy beside the climate justice ideology. What we did in our study, we are trying to understand how a particular society solve a problem. Who within the society solve that problem, define that problem, propose solution, pursue agenda, and finally approve the agenda. That was our first point. And second point, how the ideology and power works in defining those problems and agree on those problems. So we have taken Bangladesh climate change strategy and action plan that Marilyn has presented as a case to understand how that has worked. What was the major finding from that study? I think the study will be published next month, by IDS in their regular bulletin paper. So you will get a lot detail on that. So I want to share with you the 4 major findings. Number 1, this is not very unique that the spatial kind of planning process is heavily influenced by the domestic and the international politics and political economy. The BCCP was originally developed within the state of emergency that was imposed at the beginning of 2007. So that has restricted and defined the process, and that has opened up to influence of one part of the ideology than others. Let me give you an example. The BCCP, the first version that was agreed during the state of emergency and which was presented in London, in fact had another version that was approved and developed by the current political government. So BCCP first version adopted that yes, we should have a plural and open kind of funding mechanism whereby Bangladesh government can take up both loan and grants. But when the political government comes into the power, because of the left-leaning, the coalition government and influence of the climate justice movement, they have rejected and they have revised that climate change strategy paper to include only grant in the project in the BCCAP. Second is the transnational process. This is not the Bangladeshi community or the people who are vulnerable in Bangladesh who define the climate change strategy paper, but the expert one, who are particularly aligned to traditional environmental discourse and who are part of the environmental policy making and decision, that group. And second, there was a particular influence of the pluralistic thinking that once the policy space is open up, the interest group has ability and equal power to influence that process. And that did not happen. And as a result, you would find the BCCP process was done in a very quick manner, and the poor and vulnerable people who were supposed to define and influence that process was not present in the BCCAP process. And we need to, for the donors and the governments who are going to develop climate change strategy in future, that is something we need to be very aware about. Third is the contested ideology, that is the climate justice and the market-driven ideology that I have already explained. Final one, and I guess the most important one, the aid effectiveness agenda. I think you are going to talk about aid effectiveness. It's very important and relevant, as you said, as you pointed out, for Bangladesh, not only in Bangladesh and other countries as well. But within the climate change, there is an inherent tension between the impact and accountability that we need to factor in. Aid effectiveness as a short-term agenda, short-term goal can create what Merlin has said, proliferation of the funding mechanism, and often create contradiction to integrate climate change with the mainstream development processes like what Bangladesh has, the central planning process. So these are some of the major findings that we have discussed in our paper that ODI is going to publish. Now I want to talk about 5 or 6 points that might be useful for the donors and the government, for you as well, to think about the future climate change strategy building process in the countries. Number 1 is the planning approach. What should be the right kind of planning approach for a country? As I said, since climate change is a transnational issue and there would be huge influence from the international political area, donors need to be very aware about the application of aid effectiveness. Yes, it has a short-term implication. We need to identify how we make a balance between accounting and the real impact at the ground. Often, in order to deliver the accountability, we create contradiction that is not helpful in integration of climate change into the bigger picture and bigger development processes. Second is the power relation. As I said earlier, it's very important that the society is divided by power and there are different interest groups. So pluralistic approach, the way it worked and worked effectively in America in some of the developed countries may not work in poor countries. So donors should be aware of who they are working with, who they are supporting to, who are the people within a society who are particularly powerful influencing the agenda. And we also need to think about shifting lot of debate at the capital level, to the poor and local government level as well. Reliance on the market. I think that is a particularly interesting in the climate change discussion. Today, in Bangladesh, in Indonesia as well, the countries who are heavily, inundated already, they have lots of loan. Whether there is a particular justification for providing loan or offering loan to a countries for climate change adaptation, if that continue, I can foresee there would be huge campaign in the countries that are vulnerable to climate change, because climate justice is very influential thinking. Lesson to be learned from the past mega disaster. This is particularly relevant for Bangladesh. If you remember, some of you who are familiar with flood action program during early 80s in Bangladesh, which was led by the French government, a huge multi-billion-dollar flood management program. It didn't succeed because of the political economy, because of the top-down approach towards that. So climate change funding is going to be a mega kind of funding. So we need to learn from the past lesson. The final point is regarding the innovation that, Marilyn, you have mentioned. I think what we need to innovate in terms of funding mechanism is the area of accounting and the programming. Though technically, climate change is incremental or additional impact to poverty, additional impact to already disaster vulnerability. But at the programming level, if we're trying to separate that with the poverty alleviation, with the disaster risk reduction work, would be technically impossible, is not possible. And some places, yes, infrastructure development is possible. So at the programming level, the additionality should be banned. Poverty alleviation is the best way to help people to adapt with climate change. So we should not be forgetting that. For the accounting level, yes, definitely that is required at the national level, at the international level. And innovation also required to separate out funding to the least developed countries on mitigation and adaptation support. If you look at some of the big climate change strategies developed by government of Sri Lanka, government of Bangladesh, Indonesia, mitigation is pursued as essential part of the climate change strategy. But some of the donors are more interested in mitigation. We also need to be aware about the international political economy and business of clean development and mitigation. I'm not saying those are bad, but we need to separate that out, how much money is going into mitigation, how much money is going into the adaptation. This is what I wanted to share with you. Thanks so much.
Great, many thanks, Khurshid. Any brief questions for Khurshid before we open for discussion? Yes, back.
It's a question, yes. It's Carl Schultz with Climate Adaptation Works. Thank you, and thank everyone for these interesting and very useful talks. I'm a bit surprised, however, and perhaps it's just caught up into the terms of the reference of this project, but there's been no discussion of the clean development mechanism, no discussion of the example, like really started in Bangladesh, of microfinance. It's now become it was a darling child, and UNCDF and so on were sort of created to sort of exemplify this, and then of course also there's this stumbling point over microfinance also occurring in Bangladesh. And so when it comes to actually project level investment using these market mechanisms, I don't see a critique nor any views towards how it may be leveraged or should be disposed of. So that's it.
Okay. Just thinking, Khurshid or Marilyn, do you have any response, particularly in relation to Bangladesh?
Well, yes, you're right. Yes, you're right. It's a valid criticism, and that we just had limited resources, basically, for this particular project, and we had to be selective.
Okay.
On Indonesia, it was particularly focused on national level financial support, so the project level CDM doesn't really factor into that. And we think the lessons are quite distinct if you're looking at project subnational support versus national.
Okay, let me let's just move on to